Hi, my name is Adherence. Welcome to the Healthcare Stage, the go-to podcast for innovators dedicated to enhancing health and wellness globally. In each episode, we dive into insightful conversations with those at the forefront of healthcare innovation.
This episode is dedicated to a conversation with Elad Yakobson, the CEO of Pulsar Medtech, an Israeli startup founded in 2021. The company is focused on bone growth stimulation devices for the treatment of fractures. Commercially available bone growth stimulation devices promote bone healing, particularly in cases where bones have difficulty healing naturally. However, patient compliance with current devices can be challenging due to discomfort and forgetfulness. Pulsar Medtech has developed innovative lightweight patches designed to enhance patient comfort and compliance. These patches offer a promising solution, potentially increasing patient adherence and improving clinical outcomes. Following FDA approval, Pulsar Medtech aims to tap into a market valued at approximately $500 million annually. Furthermore, the potential expansion of their technology into the treatment of fresh fractures represent a significantly larger commercial opportunity. The safety and efficacy of Pulsar Medtech's new device have been demonstrated in 2 double-blinded randomized controlled studies conducted in patients with fresh fractures. Currently, the company is preparing for a pivotal study in the US scheduled for 2024. To facilitate FDA approval and market penetration into the US market, Pulsar Medtech is seeking to raise $6 to $8 million. For investors interested in opportunities in the medtech space, this podcast offers insights into Pulsar Medtech's activity. It is my absolute pleasure to host Elad Yakobson, the CEO of Pulsar Medtech. Elad is an industrial engineer which spent 10 years in the healthcare industry, serving as the CEO of a medical device company which developed a technology of pulse electromagnetic field applied in dental implants. When establishing Pulsar Medtech, Elad's mission was to design a new lightweight and compact device that induces pulse electromagnetic fields for bone growth stimulation in orthopedic patients. The design he had in mind aimed at creating an effective bone growth stimulator device that would also prioritize patient comfort and enhance compliance. Hi, Elad.
Hi, Adi.
Thank you so much for coming over.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Tell us something about yourself.
I'm 44. I live in Tel Aviv. I have 3 small daughters. I have 2 hobbies. One of them is aquascaping, which is basically a fish tank, an aquarium without fishes, just plants. And the other one is cooking. I really love cooking, and last week I learned how to make my own pasta from pasta dough. So these are my 2 hobbies.
Thanks for sharing.
Of course.
Okay, Elad, before we dive into your solution, please say a few words about bone growth stimulation devices used with orthopedic patients.
Okay, so bone growth stimulation is divided into 2 verticals. The first vertical is orthobiologics, which are biologic materials, synthetic or natural, such as bone growth factors. And the other vertical is bone growth stimulation devices. The bone growth stimulation devices, which is also called biophysical stimulation, is based on 2 principles. The first one was discovered in the 19th century. It's called Wolff's Law, which means that it says that if you load the bone continuously, you induce bone remodeling. So if you stand on your legs or jump a lot, your bone mass will increase. And the second principle was discovered in the 50s, and it was proven that when you bend the bone, electrical charges form on the bone tissue. So when you combine both of them, you basically get to the treatment modality of biophysical stimulation. You have, with bone growth stimulation, you have 2 types of devices, 2 technologies or treatment modalities. The first one is ultrasound, and the second one is electrical stimulation. Ultrasound basically creates micro movements which in turn create the electrical charges in the bone tissue. And the electrical stimulation creates the electrical charges on the bone itself. When you talk about electrical stimulation, there are two methods to create the electrical fields in the bone. Either you use electrical fields which induce the electrical potential on the bone tissue, or you use pulsed electromagnetic fields which induce an electrical field at a distance in the bone tissue.
What are the clinical benefits of bone growth stimulators?
Bone growth stimulators are used today usually in the cases of healing impairments. In fractures, you have non-union fractures. In spinal fusion, you have failed spinal fusion. Bone growth stimulation stimulates the growth of the bone, but it's not only in healing impairment, it can stimulate the healing of any bone. So, for example, any fracture that you have, a bone growth stimulator can accelerate the healing.
So you've mentioned two different indications that are treated nowadays with bone growth stimulations, right? You've mentioned non-union fraction and failed spinal fusion. Perhaps say a few words about these two very different indications.
So let's start with the non-union fractures. Non-union fracture, usually when you have a bone fracture, it heals between a month and a half to 3 months. If after 6 months the fracture didn't heal, it's called a delayed union. If after 9 months there is no healing and there was no healing in the last 3 months, it's called a non-union, which means that the bone doesn't have the ability, the fracture doesn't have the ability to heal by itself. In these cases, you have 3 options. Either you go to surgery to fix the bone, the fracture, etc. This is a very effective way. Another way is to use bone growth stimulation materials, the orthobiologics, or use a bone growth stimulation device. The devices are very effective and they're a great solution for patients that don't want to go under surgery or are unable to go under surgery. So that's a great solution for non-union fractures. The second indication, which is used for, is failed spinal fusion. Spinal fusion is a surgical procedure in which, when you have excess pressure on your spinal cord, the doctor will perform a surgery and basically fix the vertebra to one another, and after a while the vertebra would fuse to one another. In some cases, just like non-unions, the vertebra don't heal, don't fuse to one another. This is a non-union of the vertebra. And again, you can use bone growth stimulation devices for that. When you talk about spinal fusion, bone growth stimulation devices are also used for patients with high risk of non-union, not only patients with non-union, but also patients at high risk.
And how does treatment looks nowadays? How often do patients using these devices need to use them? How many hours a day? Where are they using it?
So if you have, for example, a non-union, an established non-union, the doctor will prescribe, first of all, give you a diagnosis of non-union and prescribe a bone growth stimulation device. Usually the patient will take the prescription and all the documentation and forward it to a company that manufactures bone growth stimulation devices. The company will usually submit all the form to the insurance company. Important note, bone growth stimulation devices in the United States are covered by insurance, health insurers, for the indications of non-union fractures and spinal fusion. So the company will submit the documentation to the insurance company, send the device to the patient, and then the patient starts the treatment. So you don't need to come to the clinic to use a bone growth stimulator. You just have to wear it for a period of time, depending on the manufacturer instructions and the treatment modality. Usually, ultrasound devices, you need to sit for 30 minutes with electrodes on your body, 30 minutes a day. Some devices, electrical devices, you have to wear them for 24/7 with electrodes, or 3 hours a day, or 7 hours a day, depending on the device.
And for how many months the patient needs to undergo this treatment?
Usually up to 9 months.
Okay. What are the main limitations of the current treatment with these devices?
So existing devices are cumbersome. They're not really comfortable to use. You have to recharge them, you have to operate them, you have to remember to put them on. They limit the movement. These are big devices that you have to wear on your body for a few hours a day. As you can imagine, there are compliance issues when using these devices. This, I think, is the main limitation of these devices and the technology today in general, because the technology itself is amazing. You basically have a way to actively accelerate the healing of bone, but the devices are not good enough.
Are not convenient enough, right?
Yes.
Okay, so when you established the company, what problems did you want to solve?
We wanted to take this amazing technology of bone growth stimulation and create a device which doesn't only generate pulsed electromagnetic fields to stimulate bone growth, but it's also comfortable to wear. So I don't know if you remember, but in the 80s, Motorola came out with big cell phones. The first ones, they cost like $10,000. They were really big.
Yeah.
Motorola sold something like 12,000 units. When they came out with the StarTech, the small phone, it's the exact same technology, cellular technology, but the device was smaller and more comfortable to use, they sold 60 million of it. So we want to do the same thing with the bone growth stimulation technology and bone growth stimulation devices, and create something which is comfortable to use. We want to use it, give it to patients that currently use it for non-union fractures or spinal fusion. But in addition, and this is our main goal, we want to give it to any patient with a fracture. So this technology has the ability to accelerate the healing of any fracture and enhance every person's own healing ability, something like superpowers. And we want to give it to any patient with a fracture.
So what are the main clinical advantages of using this technology with what's called fresh fractures?
So when you have a fresh fracture, usually in order for the fracture to heal, you need to stabilize the fracture so it can grow and connect. This is done either by surgery with plates or screws or nails, or conservatively, yes, with a cast. Yes. In any case, when you immobilize part of the body, there is a physical deterioration. So you have atrophy of the muscles, the ligaments are shortening, and it creates damage. This damage is later on, after you finish the healing and the recovery, you need to do physical therapy and rehabilitation to gain the initial abilities that your body had.
Especially among the elderly population.
Yes, especially among the elderly. Yeah. When you talk about elderly patients, there are also higher mortality rates. It's, as you said, it's very important, especially for older patients, but also to young people which are very active and want to get back being active. Right. So if you shorten the healing duration, you basically minimize the damage to the tissue that is caused because of the immobilization. So if you immobilize for example, the leg, instead of 8 weeks, you immobilize it for 6 weeks or 5 weeks, there is less damage, you need less rehabilitation. This is one aspect. The other aspect is the cost. So the longer the healing is, people miss more work days. The average cost of a workday loss per fracture in the United States is about $5,000. If you shorten the healing duration by about 30%, it means that you save about $1,500 per fracture. You have 8 million fractures in the United States every year. So these are huge costs that we can save. In addition, medication. The shorter the healing, there is less pain, less medication, less opioid use. So there are a lot of benefits.
So in essence, what you claim is that nowadays you cannot treat fresh fractures with current commercially available devices because they're inconvenient, because they're very cumbersome. But with your solution that we're going to show in a second, that's become feasible. So if pricing is affordable, in essence, you can treat any fracture with your device, which opens a new market segment.
Yes.
Currently not treated with bone growth stimulators.
So there are bone growth stimulation devices that have FDA approval for acceleration of healing of specific fractures, usually long bones, distal radius, etc. They don't have reimbursement codes, and the use of these devices is very limited. So even though when you have a fracture, if someone would tell you, listen, I can save you 30% of the time you need to walk around with a cast or lay in bed, most people don't want to use it because it means that you have to sit every day for 30 minutes with electrodes on your body. And we think that a device which is comfortable and easy to use and you don't see it or feel it, there are no disadvantages to using it.
So let's talk a little bit about the technology. How were you able to generate such a small, compact, lightweight device while receiving the same level of efficacy?
I think the main difference is that we approach the problem from a different angle. So we didn't aim to just create a bone growth stimulator. We aim to create something which is thin and comfortable to wear and easy to place on the body.
Right.
So electromagnetic fields decay by the square as a factor of distance. So the further you are from the bone, it means that you need to generate a higher initial intensity of pulsed electromagnetic field. So our device is very small, so it's basically on the skin, so the distance is shorter. So we need to generate a lower initial intensity because the field doesn't decay as much. This enables us to use a smaller battery.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, we have a proprietary patent-protected energy saving circuit, which enables us to generate something like 10 times the voltage of a standard battery. So when we take a small battery, we can generate a higher voltage. And because the battery is small, we can create a smaller device, which means that we have a device which is closer to the bone. For example, if our device was 10 millimeters thick, we won't be able to place it under a cast, for example, which means that if you place it over the cast, outside the cast, you have like 2 centimeters in addition to travel. The PMF has an additional 2 centimeters of distance to travel. And it's very important. So this is how we were able to create this device. We're using, in addition to everything I said, we're using something which is called the pendulum effect. This is part of our proprietary energy saving circuit. The pendulum effect, it's basically, if I give an example, when you swing your kid on a swing, the competitors will push the kid will go up with the swing, come back down, and then they will stop, and then they will push him again, which means that you have to invest the same amount of energy every time to get the kid and the swing to the same height. What we're using is similar to what all parents do. We basically give them an initial push, and then we just compensate with small pushes to just compensate on the loss of energy. So this is the principle in which our energy saving circuit works.
Let's talk a little bit about the characteristics of the device. We brought one here today.
Yes.
And this device is very small.
Yes.
How much does it weigh?
Around 100 grams.
Very elastic.
Yes.
What is it made from?
This is medical grade silicone. You have microelectronics inside. You have a coil and an electronic module and a battery. It's flexible. It's thin. It's 5 millimeters thick.
So everything is embedded here inside.
Yes.
And you just place it under the cast or over the cast.
Yeah.
Right?
Not over the cast, under the. If you have a cast, if you're using it for fresh fractures, for example.
Yeah.
Standard common fracture. The doctor will place it on your arm, and then it will place the cast over it.
Right.
So patients that have it under the cast don't even see it. So it's very lightweight. You don't feel it. You don't have to operate it. You don't have to recharge it. It's single use.
So you don't have to place it or remove it or charge it. It's simply there.
Yeah. It's a patch on your body.
Mostly unnoticeable because it's so lightweighted.
Yes.
And you have this in different sizes.
Yes, because you need, if you want, for example, you want to treat a fracture in the thigh, the distance between the skin and the bone is bigger than, for example, the distance between my skin and the distal radius. So we have different sizes, different models to fit different bones and different areas of the body, and also different body types.
That's lovely. So, and in terms of the battery life of this?
This specific model can last something like 170 days.
So you have different patches with different battery life, right? Which is relevant to the different periods in which the patient needs to be treated.
Yes, yes. For example, for fresh fractures, the normal healing of distal radius fracture, wrist fracture, is 6 weeks. So you don't need a device that works for 9 months like in non-union fractures. So for each indication and each area of the body, we have a different device that is suitable for the indication and the body part.
Now, this is the first product that you intend to submit to the FDA and pursue a clinical study in the US. We'll talk about it in a second. But in our previous conversation, you told me that you're currently working on the development of novel sensors. So not in the first version, but in the second version, you will have such patches with sensors.
Yes.
So what are these sensors going to measure? And how will that improve the clinical outcome?
So we understood that this is one of the only devices, special external devices, which are near the fracture site for the entire healing duration. So you have plates and screws, but they're internally. Mm-hmm. External devices, I think this is the only one that people wear on the fracture site. And we decided to take advantage of it and incorporate a variety of sensors that will help the patient and the doctor get additional data and improve clinical outcome. For example, we have pressure sensors. One of the things that we've learned when we talked with the trauma specialists is that many times when a patient fractures, for example, his arm, and the doctor will apply the cast, the arm swells because of the fracture, because of the trauma.
Yep.
And because the patient is not used to having a cast limiting his limb, many times the patient will come to the doctor and complain that he feels a lot of pressure inside the cast. This can be a problem because if there is a lot of pressure and excess pressure, it can create blood circulation problems. But the doctor can't actually know if it's a problem or not, and in most cases, it's just because the patient is not used to having a cast. So our pressure sensor will be able to tell the doctor if there is actually excess pressure. It can also tell the patient if the patient is unaware that there is a problem. And if there is excess pressure, it can also alert the patient. So this is one example of the sensors we have. Additional sensors we have are motion sensors that can actually check if you're moving your arm or you're moving your shoulder or your leg like you have to or too much. So if you have a clavicle fracture, for example, you don't want to move your shoulder too much because if the fracture moves too much, you can go into non-union and surgery. So in these cases, if you have a patch, the patch will give you an indication that you're moving too much and you're increasing the risk of non-union. On the other hand, if you have, for example, a distal radius fracture, a wrist fracture, after something like 2 weeks, the doctor will tell you to start moving your arm because, as we mentioned before, there is atrophy of the muscles, and basically it hurts the whole variety of tissue that we have.
Right.
So the doctor will want you to start walking and do rehabilitation at home. And this will be able to tell you if you're moving properly, if you need to do more movements. It will tell the patient exactly how to move and how much to move, and it will tell the doctor if the patient
That's
is doing it
amazing.
correctly.
And the feedback would be received by both the patient and the physician.
It's early to say, but most likely the patient, and if the patient wants to share it, he can share it with the physician.
Tell us a little bit about the clinical data you generated up until now.
Okay. So first of all, when you establish a startup company in the medical devices industry, usually you have to invest something like the minimum of 10 years of your life in that company. So before we started, we wanted to see that it actually works. So we've done 2 clinical trials with the distal radius fractures, which are fractures of the wrist. They're very common. They're not very problematic, but they're very common, and we wanted to see results fast, so we will know if it's working or not.
Meaning you wanted to see if you're able to heal the fracture more rapidly with your solution.
Yes, we want. As I said, our main focus is accelerating the healing of fresh fractures. So this was our first 2 clinical trials. So we've done 2 clinical trials in Tel Aviv Medical Center. It was an investigator-initiated trial, so it's not sponsored by the company. We've just provided the devices. And we've done 2 trials, one for distal radius fractures treated surgically, and one for the same fractures treated conservatively. When you treat a fracture surgically, usually you put a plate or a nail, which is metal, and we wanted to see that it doesn't affect the electromagnetic field. Both trials were randomized, controlled, double-blind trials. So neither the patient nor the doctor knew if the patient has a working device or a sham device. So each patient was randomly allocated to one group, A or B. If he was, for example, in the A group, he would get a device from the A box, and the B from the B box. One device was working, the other device wasn't working. And we've seen that we accelerate the healing by 30% and shortening the healing by 30%.
What exactly did you measure? In what frequencies?
So we've done, not us, the researchers, done an X-ray at the baseline, which means when the patient comes to the OR, another X-ray at 2 weeks, a CT scan at 4 weeks, another X-ray at 6 weeks, 12 weeks, and 24 weeks. And we've measured at each X-ray was evaluated by 3 independent raters, orthopedic surgeons and radiologist. And we've seen at 4 weeks that there is 30% difference between the control group and the test group. So the difference between the groups was 30%, and we've measured the extent of healing at 4 weeks. So we've measured at 4 weeks. We took a CT scan, and we've checked what is the percentage of the fracture that actually united after 4 weeks. And we've seen that there was 30% difference between the groups, the 2 groups.
So in the treated groups, you saw that there is about 50% healed bones.
Something like if I remember correctly, in the test group with the working devices, we've seen that after 4 weeks, about 70 to 80% of the fracture was healed.
Right.
And in the control group, about 50% of the fracture was healed.
So basically, you saw the same results in the 2 study.
Yes.
When the first with patients undergoing surgery, and with the second study, the patients were treated with cast conservatively.
Yes. In
Nice.
addition, we've done, besides the X-rays and CT scan, we've done patient-reported outcome questionnaires, SF12, PRWE. These are questionnaires that actually check the levels of pain, the functionality of the patient. We've done hand grip tests, so we actually measure the strength of the patient after in each group. We've done range of motion to check the range of how much the patient can extend his arm, etc. All these results correlated with the radiologic results. And we had also patients, very relatively old people, women in their 80s, also young people. But I think one of the most amazing things was to see an 82-year-old patient with osteoporosis, with a hand fracture, a distal radius fracture, and the doctors removed the cast after 4 weeks. And the doctor didn't know if she's in the control group or test group. He just saw the X-rays and the imaging and decided that it's good enough to take off the cast. And for a woman at that age, the difference between wearing a cast for 6 weeks of, yes,
Right.
very big difference.
Nice. So you're currently preparing for the pivotal study you're about to conduct in the US this year, Q3 or Q4. Can you say a few words about the design of the study?
We've done a pre-submission for the FDA.
Okay.
We've submitted, usually you just submit a synopsis of the clinical protocol. We've submitted a full clinical protocol. And we got FDA's feedback regarding our suggested protocol. So we know exactly what the sample size will be. We know the follow-up duration. And these are two very important points because this affects how long the FDA process will take and how much will it cost. All bone growth stimulation devices are class 3 devices, which means that the FDA traditionally, it's sort of legacy decision that all bone growth stimulation devices are classified as class 3, which is the highest class of medical devices with the FDA, highest risk, which means that all bone growth stimulators have to go under the PMA pathway.
Right.
So the FDA convened, I think, 4 years ago in 2020, 3.5 years ago, they convened the Surgeons Advisory Board, which recommended to down-classify bone growth stimulators to class 2 devices and move them to a 510K pathway with special controls, which means that in any case, every company that wants to approve a bone growth stimulator, even later on after the decision will be approved and published, will need to do clinical trials and safety testing, etc. We don't know exactly when the FDA will publish the new rule. So working under the assumption of PMA, if anything happens along the way, we'll just benefit from it.
Right. So cross my fingers. Okay, let's talk a little bit about your market.
So our main market is fresh fractures. This is where we want to go eventually.
Right.
When you talk about fresh fractures, you have something like 180 million fractures worldwide every year. Let's say, just for the convenience of a calculation, if the device price will be $500, we're talking about a $90 billion market. So this is if everyone in the world that has a fracture buys a device. So
Right.
this is the TAM.
Less realistic.
Yes.
Yeah.
But more realistically, if we talk about, for example, countries in the OECD with GDP per capita of over $32,000, you have 25 million fractures there. So we're talking about a market size of $12.5 billion. And this is only the fresh fractures. When you talk about non-union fractures, the prevalence of non-union fractures is between 5 to 10%, let's say 7%. You're talking about, if you're talking about the OECD countries, it's almost 2 million fractures a year. Naturally, the cost of bone growth stimulation devices for non-union fractures and spinal fusion is much higher. As I said, in the US, there are reimbursement codes, and the fees are something like $4,700 per device. So it's a huge market. So also in the non-union and spinal fusion, you have an additional, besides the fresh fractures, you have an additional huge market. Because non-union and spinal fusion have reimbursement codes, we're focusing first on these indications.
This is your primary market.
Not primary, this is the first step.
Yeah,
So on the way to fresh fractures, we're going to first focus on the US market for the indications of non-unions, later spinal fusion, and later expand indication to fresh fractures.
Right, you want to take advantage of the available reimbursement codes.
Yes, there are actual sales. Globally, the actual sales of bone growth stimulation devices is about $800 million. In the United States, it's $500 million a year. So these are actual sales. You don't have to convince anyone to buy it. These are doctors that already prescribes these devices. The only thing we need to do is give them a better device. So we assume, and from the feedbacks that we get from doctors and users and patients, we assume that most doctors will prefer to prescribe something like this than a big cumbersome device.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And put fresh fractures aside, you think you would be able to enlarge the market segment of non-union fractures with your device?
Yes, one of the things that limit the use of bone growth stimulation devices is the data. So most of the data for bone growth stimulation devices is relatively old. So the market leader has data from, I think, the 90s. I think that a new company that comes into the market with the fresh trial, with the current gold standards of research, non-union research, and brings fresh and solid FDA-approved results, will have a big impact on additional users, additional doctors to start using this technology.
Because some of the patients nowadays go directly to surgery. They
Yes,
kind of
many
pass through the...
many patients going to surgery. Some patients that don't want to go under surgery, or some patients that can't have a surgery. And there are a lot of patients that can't have surgery, use bone growth stimulation devices. In addition, I can tell you that there are many doctors that think that the compliance issues with the patient compliance when using bone growth stimulation devices, it's a big issue. So doctors see that in some cases it doesn't work because patients don't want to wear it. It's not comfortable. So we think we can bring a new message to the world of bone growth stimulation in non-union spinal fusion, but most importantly with fresh fractures.
Let's talk about the competitive landscape. Who's out there?
There are about 5 companies that control this market, not very big companies. So you have Orthofix is the market leader.
These are the devices.
Yes, I'm talking about the devices, yes.
Okay.
Orthofix is the market leader. They have around 45% of the market. You have Bioventus, you have Zimvi, and DJO. These are the main players. None of them are very big companies. DJO is a big company, but bone growth stimulation is only a small part of it. What's interesting is that when you take, if you remember at the beginning, I said that there are 2 verticals for bone growth stimulation. You have the orthobiologics and you have the devices. The orthobiologics for non-unions is very close. Non-union spinal fusion is the market size is relatively close in size to the devices market. And when you look at the orthobiologics market, you see all the huge companies, all the market leaders of orthopedics, Zimmer Biomet, J&J, Smith & Nephew, Stryker, all of them competing with one another fiercely for the same market as the devices market.
Right. So these are your potential strategic partners.
Yes, we know that some of the big companies would like to go into the devices market, but this is not like orthobiologics. You need to have specific technology, you need to develop a device. It's not very easy.
Yeah.
And I think we will present an opportunity for partnership with one of the big companies, and they will offer the opportunity to basically the usage of this device for any fresh fracture.
Let's talk a little bit about money. Up until now, you guys raised $4.1 million, right?
Yes. Yes.
Moving forward, how much money do you wish to raise, and what are you going to do with this money?
So as you said, we've raised $4.1 million so far.
Mhm.
We've used only 2.1 with it. So everything that we've done so far in the last 2.5 years, 3 years, was with just $2.1 million. We still have money. We're going to open a new round soon of between $6 to $8 million. This round will be aimed to take us past the FDA approval and initial sales.
So if I'm kind of trying to summarize your achievements to date, I would say, first of all, that you have very high execution capabilities if you were able to achieve all this with $2 million.
And great team. Yes.
Lean and mean. We didn't talk about it, but you have a very nice IP portfolio. You have 6 granted patents, and you have about 10 pending patents.
Yes.
You generated very compelling clinical data. You already have the protocol, which resulted from the interaction with the FDA. And you designed something which is based on very known and prevalent technology. You're using the same reimbursement code,
Yes.
but it would be much more convenient.
Yes.
So adherence and compliance hopefully would be much higher. I would like to ask you a question about the challenges and limitations you foresee moving forward and the way you are going to mitigate these challenges.
Okay. The first challenge is basically a run out of money. And this is the challenge of every startup. In our case, I think it's the only thing that can stop us. Another point is that sometimes medical devices companies secure FDA approval but don't have enough money to start initial sales and initial market penetration.
Right.
So the round that we're opening now will enable us to secure FDA approval with contingencies and have enough money to start initial market penetration and lead us in a good position to our A round. The second challenge is the actual market penetration. So there's a big difference between a development company and the commercial company that actually sells in the US. It's not an easy task, and we've already started working. We have a network of doctors and people from the industry, specifically from the bone growth stimulation industry. And we're already working on our penetration plan and the channels and the funnels and everything.
We're nearing the end of our meeting, and I wanted to ask you if there anything else you would like to share about the company mission.
Yes, I think that what we're doing is important to me, especially. I'll tell you a story. My grandfather was, I think, 76. He was a very strong person, very healthy, very active. He was still walking physically at his old age. One day he fell from a ladder from, I think, 2 meters. He had the proximal femur fracture of the hip. He stayed in bed for, I think, 3 months. He got pressure sores. He had vascular problems. He had a stroke. And he survived the stroke, but he wasn't the same person after that. He became from an independent, working, strong man, deteriorated dramatically. And I think that if he would have stayed in bed less, And if we could accelerate the healing of his fracture, maybe he wouldn't have to suffer that. And he's not the only one. A lot of, as you said before, many older patients suffer from the same disadvantages and the same risks with healing. So it's not only business for us, it's also personal.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with me.
Thank you.
I hope this podcast will help you guys in your important journey. I hope that you receive regulatory approval for non-union fractures and spinal fusion patients, and very quickly pursue additional indication of fresh fractures, which can potentially reduce fracture healing time and increase the quality of life, especially among the elderly. For audience interested in learning more about the clinical data generated by Pulsar Medtech, I recommend visiting the website. I wish to thank Google Campus here in Tel Aviv for hosting us today. This podcast is available on the LinkedIn page and YouTube channel called The Healthcare Stage, and also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you are working at companies developing novel solutions aimed at improving the lives of others, or you are a researcher in hospital or academia conducting groundbreaking research with potential clinical application, do get in touch with me at adi@thehealthcarestage.com. Elad, I hope the company will achieve all its milestones. Thank you so much for coming over.
Thank you
It
for
was
having
an
me.
honor and a pleasure.